Good evening, and welcome to the evening from the New York Times. I'm Matthew Cullen, and it's Monday, July 27, 2026. We're coming to you at the close of a day that has seen historic wildfires tearing through Western Europe, a presidential visit to a critical battleground state, a growing standoff over federal transit funding, and a House vote that could permanently change how Americans experience time itself. We'll also take you from the front lines of a war in the Middle East now in its sixth month, to a Seattle food festival turned crime scene, to the unlikely story of marmots raising research money on an adult content platform. And we'll end, as we often do, with a craftsman who has spent 15 years painting pointe shoes in the shadows of the New York City Ballet. Let's begin. The story dominating headlines across the Atlantic tonight is the sheer scale of the wildfire crisis unfolding in France and Spain. Officials are already calling this the worst wildfire season in the region's modern history. Thousands of firefighters, troops, and volunteers have been racing to contain blazes that have destroyed hundreds of homes, fueled by parched vegetation after weeks of successive heat waves. This is the fourth major heat wave to hit Europe since May, and the toll is staggering. More than 300,000 people across the two countries have fled the fires. Conditions improved slightly overnight, allowing crews to slow the spread around major population centers like Madrid and Bordeaux. But forecasters are warning that a dangerous blast of heat and strong winds expected this week could intensify everything all over again. What makes this fire season particularly terrifying is something firefighters in France say they've never encountered before: a pyrocumulonimbus, or fire cloud. These are massive, heat-fueled thunderstorms created by the intense energy of the blazes themselves. They produce lightning and burning embers that can spark new fires miles away, and they generate high, unpredictable winds that fan existing flames. But they rarely bring rain. One such fire cloud generated more blazes over the weekend in Gironde, the hardest-hit region in southwestern France, accelerating the spread in ways that caught even seasoned crews off guard. As Claire Moses reports, these pyroCBS are a phenomenon more commonly associated with volcanic eruptions than wildfires in Western Europe. On the ground, the human stories are harrowing. In the village of Le Temple, about 18 miles west of Bordeaux, Guillaume Boss watched as fire swept through his community. "Everything is burned as far as the eye can see," he told Ségolène Lestratic. His wife and son are among the evacuees, but Boss, a business manager and forest owner, stayed behind with others to try to hold back the flames threatening their homes. "It's a real disaster," he said. With firefighters stretched thin, volunteers across the region have been using water tanks, hoses, and tractors to protect villages and farms, putting themselves at extraordinary risk. The skies over both countries have been choked with smoke, and temperatures in parts of France and Spain are forecast to climb to 104 degrees Fahrenheit, 40 degrees Celsius, this week. The evacuations have happened by land and by sea, and the images coming out are apocalyptic: helicopters pulling water from swimming pools, entire horizons glowing orange at midnight. From the fire lines of Europe, we turn to the campaign trail in America, where President Trump traveled today to a General Motors facility in Milford, Michigan. He delivered what amounted to a campaign-style speech, projecting confidence about the state of the economy ahead of the midterms. His advisors say this is part of a broader push to defend his economic record across the country. Michigan is particularly significant. The state has been hit hard by his tariffs, and early voting for next week's closely watched primaries began today. One of the biggest contests is the Democratic Senate primary, a proxy war for the party's future. On one side is Abdul El-Sayed, a progressive and the son of Egyptian immigrants, who at a recent rally in Detroit spoke about the country's upcoming 250th anniversary, only to be met with a boo from the crowd, which he immediately shut down. "We don't boo." On the other side is Representative Haley Stevens, a pro-Israel moderate backed by Democratic leadership and the leading pro-Israel super PAC. She's trying to defy a trend that has seen mainstream Democrats lose high-profile primaries this year to progressives campaigning on ending U.S. military support for Israel. As Michael Cruz and Reed Epstein report, this race is a critical front in the fight between the party's progressive and moderate flanks, and a preview of the 2028 presidential primary. But the Democratic Party's challenges go well beyond any single primary. Inside party headquarters, the financial situation has become dire. The DNC is so short on cash that leaders have been asking vendors to send bills after the midterms, a bookkeeping maneuver described by 3 people briefed on it as an attempt to mask the severity of the problems. Every week brings paranoia, worries about money, and, on occasion, emotional eruptions. Shane Goldmacher and Reed Epstein, after interviewing more than 24 Democrats, paint a picture of a party that should be well positioned for midterm gains but is instead consumed by dysfunction. Elsewhere on the political landscape, in Arizona, Republicans have nominated Alexander Collin for Secretary of State. His highest-profile lawsuit was part of the effort to release the Kraken and overturn the 2020 election. A federal judge dismissed it, finding claims of massive voter fraud sorely wanting of relevant or reliable evidence, and the Arizona State Bar later fined him and sent him to mandatory ethics training. In Wisconsin, a recent poll shows Francesca Hong, a Democratic socialist and state lawmaker, favored in the crowded Democratic gubernatorial primary with 3 weeks to go. Her campaign has energized young voters. One 19-year-old college student called himself a honghead and said he'd never voted in a governor's race before. Now, a story about billions of dollars that Congress authorized but the administration isn't spending. For decades, the federal government has used the Capital Investment Grants program to help communities pay for ambitious transit projects, subway tracks, train stations, roads rebuilt for modern bus service. Today, that program funds extensions of the 2nd Avenue subway in New York, the Red Line in Chicago, the Gateway Tunnel under the Hudson River, and bus infrastructure in Indianapolis and San Antonio. But since President Trump returned to office, the Federal Transit Administration has not signed a single new agreement under the program. As a result, more than $7 billion that Congress designated for these grants has accumulated without any project to spend it on. Emily Badger and Alicia Parlapiano detail which projects had hoped to receive that funding and are now left waiting. In other Trump administration legal news, the president asked the Supreme Court on Monday to clear the way for an executive order restricting voting by mail. The administration filed an emergency application after a federal appeals court on Saturday blocked key parts of the order. Solicitor General D. John Sauer called the lower court ruling indefensible, asserting it imposed serious irreparable harm on the federal government. This sets up a legal showdown as the president pushes for more control over voting ahead of November's midterms. Abby Van Sickle reports from Washington. Now, let's talk about time, specifically, the twice-yearly ritual of changing the clocks that almost everyone hates. The House recently passed the Sunshine Protection Act, which would halt the clock switching and make daylight saving time permanent. It promises an easy fix. But as Lynn Peoples explains, scientists warn that the move comes with real risks for health and the economy. The trade-off is this: permanent daylight saving time gives you more evening light year-round, which might encourage socializing and reduce car accidents. But it also means much later winter sunrises across much of the U.S. In some places, the sun wouldn't rise until after 9 a.m. in January. Sleep experts say that messes with our internal circadian rhythms, which are tuned to morning light. A competing House measure would lock the clock on standard time instead. Lawmakers now face three imperfect options: permanent daylight saving time, permanent standard time, or the seasonal switching we have now. There's no perfect answer, but the science suggests the current debate may be overlooking the biological costs of darker mornings. Let's run through the rest of the day's major developments. In Idaho, Brian Kohberger, the criminology student convicted last year of murdering 4 University of Idaho students in their off-campus home, is seeking to abandon his guilty plea and obtain a trial. He's currently serving 4 life sentences. In his first interview from prison, with Mike Baker, Kohberger said he filed a petition challenging his conviction, citing concerns about how the plea deal came together. "My actual innocence is my truth," he said, claiming he was misled by false promises and wrong information. In the Middle East, the war with Iran is entering its 6th month and a period of deep uncertainty. John Ismay provides a rundown of the major events. Soon after the war began on February 28, President Trump declared Iran totally defeated and wants a deal. In March, he said the U.S. military would wrap up its campaign in 2 to 3 weeks. Now, after nearly 2 weeks of attacks and counterattacks, Mr. Trump has held off a major escalation, but major issues remain unsettled. The cycles of fighting have resulted in staggering losses, an estimated 1,700 Iranian civilians killed in airstrikes, and the conflict shows no clear end in sight. On Capitol Hill, Senator Mitch McConnell, the former Republican leader from Kentucky, said Monday he would not return to the Senate this week. He's been hospitalized for 6 weeks and said in a statement he's still working hard to get back to my full schedule but is not yet medically cleared to leave his rehabilitation facility. The 84-year-old will also miss this Saturday's Fancy Farm, the annual Kentucky political picnic he's attended for more than 4 decades. Carl Hulse reports. In tech, a remarkable Times examination by Eli Tan and Maureen Farrell details how Meta used secret talks with local officials to clear the way for a $50 billion data center in Louisiana, the largest development in the state's history, big enough to cover nearly 6 square miles. In April 2024, a Louisiana legislative committee was about to consider a bill when the governor's office sent an urgent message to the Revenue Secretary: get the bill passed. The reporting traces how the Silicon Valley giant got everything it wanted through private negotiations that bypassed public scrutiny. In Seattle, 3 people were killed and as many as 5 wounded Sunday night at a food festival near the Space Needle. Police arrested a 15-year-old and said one of the 3 dead was a 19-year-old man believed to be one of the gunmen. Investigators believe 2 people were shooting at each other. Police were still searching for another possible suspect on Monday. Ollie Watkins and Anna Griffin have the details. At the Pentagon, before Admiral Daryl Cottle was picked to lead the Navy, he found ways to signal his support for Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's anti-diversity goals. His rise reveals the politics driving Hegseth's Pentagon, where loyalty to the Secretary's agenda has become a prerequisite for advancement. In New York, Mayor Zoran Mamdani announced that the city's 5 planned city-run grocery stores, 1 in each borough, will offer a 30% discount on a core basket of healthy groceries, including produce, meat, seafood, pasta, bread, yogurt, butter, nuts, and rice. The city will build the stores, waive rent and property taxes, and provide an operating subsidy to fund the discounts. Emma Fitzsimmons reports. In Guyana, the sinking of a state-run ferry this month killed an estimated 100 people, the country's deadliest event since Jonestown in 1978. The tragedy is deepening political fault lines in one of the world's fastest-growing economies, an oil-rich nation and top U.S. ally in South America. Simon Romero, who has reported from Guyana for more than 20 years, writes that many are asking how this could happen in a country transformed by oil wealth. And in Cuba, 6 months into a U.S. oil blockade intended to strangle the island's economy, the country has lasted far longer than expected. President Trump predicted in January, it's just going to fall. But Jack Nikes and Alex Pena, on the first New York Times journalism visas granted in nearly 8 years, found Cubans adapting with remarkable ingenuity, keeping vintage cars running, farming without fuel, finding ways to endure the worst energy crisis in the island's history. Now, a breath. The evening's Time to Unwind section invites us to look closer at the world around us. To mark the country's 250th birthday, the Times put together a guide to traces of pre-revolution history still visible in New York City, tucked between the concrete and glass. There's the Bowling Green fence, which patriots damaged in 1776 when they tore down a statue of King George III. And there's the English elm in Washington Square Park, one of the few still living beings to have experienced the American Revolution. It's a reminder that history isn't only in museums, it's in the trees and the ironwork we walk past every day. Speaking of history brought to life, Christopher Nolan's new film, The Odyssey, has a scene where Odysseus has his crew tie him to the mast to hear the siren's song. But instead of voices, the viewer hears Ludwig Göransson's soundtrack, a reedy tune of longing and sorrow played on the aulos, an ancient reed instrument that looks like 2 recorders joined. Joshua Barone, our classical music critic, hasn't been able to get that moment out of his head. The aulos hasn't been heard in centuries. Göransson resurrected it for the film. You can listen to it, we made it free for all evening readers. A few dinner table topics to carry you through the week. Guy Tudor, whose precise illustrations brought obscure birds to life in definitive field guides, died at 91. His artwork changed how generations of birders saw the neotropics. Our fashion critic Vanessa Friedman tackles the eternal question, what does semi-formal even mean these days? She calls it the DMZ of fashion, the middle ground that causes more angst than clarity. In New Zealand, young Maori are embracing tamoko, the ritual tattoo art once outlawed under British colonial rule and revived as an act of protest in the 1970s. Mark Kopua draws patterns from memory on his nephew's arm, each motif carrying ancestral meaning. And yes, really, marmots are on OnlyFans. A team of scientists uploaded videos of the squirrel-like rodents in the wild to the adult content site to raise money amid federal budget cuts to research funding. Daniel Bloomstein, a biologist in Colorado, got the idea from a TV show about a single mother turning to OnlyFans. Only Marms was born, wholesome marmot content for a good cause. For tonight, cook a rich coconut lentil soup in a slow cooker. Read Annie Jacobson's Biological War, a sobering book about the potentially civilization-ending impacts of biological warfare, reviewed by Dwight Garner. Keep a travel journal. Jenna Schneuer says there's no perfect way, but future you will be glad you did. Take our quiz on your daily fluid needs, stay hydrated. Try a 20-minute agility ladder workout to improve coordination. Take the latest flashback history quiz. And play today's connections, spelling bee, and mini crossword. Finally, our one last thing, for 15 years, Tim Foster has been an unsung hero at New York City Ballet. He's the company's shoe colorist tasked with transforming countless shipments of pale pink pointe shoes into shades of powdery blue, vibrant red, or, in recent years, the exact flesh tone of each dancer. It's a delicate, painstaking art he's perfected in the shadows. He only gained broader attention when a documentary filmmaker became interested in his niche. But dance has been a lifetime interest for Foster, who first performed for crowds as a child when his father was in a country western band. He is, as we've called him, the Picasso of pointe shoes. Have a crafty evening. Thanks for reading. I'll be back tomorrow. This has been the evening from the New York Times.